Welcome to CJWinter How-To video series. Here at CJWinter, we provide better tools, fast delivery, great service, and value. In this series of how-to videos, we're going to go through and outline the CJWinter pneumatic attachment, tear down, inspect, and repair. We'll be focusing mainly on the rolling head portion, and we'll be looking at the roll pins and fulcrum pins, the gear trains, compensator assembly, the roll arms and brackets for damage and wear. We'll also show the difference between a 160 series and 162 style of roll head, and as well as how to install the quick release cylinder onto the roll heads.
Okay, we have a 160 and a 162, and then a power pack. This power pack is going to be able to attach to either one of these. Power packs are not unique to any one thread rolling head. So the 160, the difference is in the arm, and it holds a pin that's 5/8 diameter, roll pin. Where the 162 has a bigger, it's heavier duty, and has their roll pin is 812 thousandths. And also another difference is with the heavier duty, the width of the roll is shorter, and it has a thrust bearing in it to absorb more of the side torque that you're going to get because you're rolling, typically you're going to be rolling a heavier thread or using a lot more roll pressure. And the only other difference is the way that the roll pin is adjusted. The 160 uses two screws, uses a jacking type.
Opposing set screws.
Yeah, opposing set screws, and loosen one, tighten the other, and moves your pin back and forth, your alignment back and forth. Where the 162 has a tapered adjusting screw. So you have to take and loosen up this inner screw, slide your pin out, and use a bladed screwdriver. Basically just turn your screw in or out until the flat lines up so you can get your pin back in. You can see the screw there. It has a, let me rotate it around. You can see the flat on there. That's what I'm talking about. And then your roll pin has a big flat on it. It just slides back in there. Once it's back in, you just lock your locking screw down. And you're good to go. Where the 160, we don't like to touch the inside screw. We like to leave that where it needs to be, where it's set at 0, and you loosen up your locking screw. So on the 160, if you wanted to remove the thread rolling pin, or if you had to make any kind of adjustments for taper, this is the locking screw. The center screw is set at the factory at 0 so that you can change your thread rolls without having to loosen or touch this taper screw, because the pin has a nice flat on it, and that flat should go towards the center so it can slide over that screw there. Then you just take your locking screw and lock the pin down. There you go. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to use the quick disconnect. The bottom of the bracket is a washer and a locking mechanism. On your power pack, you have the rotating locking mechanism. So you would have your wedge on there. You line up these 3 tabs with the 3 slots on the bracket. Slides in. Use your spanner wrench in the hole, and it should take a quarter turn locking it together, and it's not coming apart. To loosen it, just do the opposite. Give it a little whack, comes apart. And it's the same for any one of these heads, larger heads that are detachable. All have the newer ones, all have the quick disconnect, so you can interchange the power packs with any head.
So this would be for the 160 series, 160, 162, and then the 170 series, 170, 172, etc. All work the same way.
And that's locked together. No, it's not. The older style had a thread on it. Thread on the this ring would be threaded, and then there was a thread on the ID of the power pack or the thread milling head. And with all the chips and oil, putting it back together and turning it on and off was quite challenging. So that's why we came up with the quick release.
There's also an update kit that will convert the older style attachment screw type to the quick release mechanism.
Okay, now I'm going to show you how to break the head down and do inspection of the gear train and compensator mechanism. First thing I do is remove the fulcrum pins. You do that by removing the screw on each one. Take your Allen wrench and just push the fulcrum pin out. When you bring those out, you might as well inspect those, make sure there's no damage to the OD. Over the years, if you have an old attachment, you'll see wear from the thread roll arm and the gear. And if you see any of that, you're better off ordering a new pin to save yourself some headaches. So to get the arms out, just basically drop them down, give them a little turn, bring them right out together. Okay, now I'm going to remove the center gear guard. Take that cap screw out of there. That just slides out. Then you can inspect your compensator gears. Just look for any teeth that might be damaged. Flop that over. Use your spring pliers. Take the retaining spring out. Take off the adjusting collar. Now there's 2 springs in here, so kind of cup your hand to make sure the springs don't go flying when you take this apart. And remove your spring retainer. It's got a locking screw and a dog point set screw. Loosen those up, take that off. On the external compensator gear, there is a little detent, and in the spring retainer, that first screw that you put in, it's got a dog point. That dog point has to lock into that detent so that you're able to get the right compensation. All right, so now we got this all stripped down. Now we're going to inspect the bracket for any damage. Look at your fulcrum screw or fulcrum holes. If you have a real bad crash, you might have a break here. If you're doing a lot of, if you have any bad crashes or really heavy duty material that you're trying to roll, you could get stress cracks in this area right here. Also, I've seen cracks in this area from bad crashes also. So those are the two weak spots, and I check the holes to make sure that they're still round and not getting egg-shaped or oblonged. If that's happening, you might want to get a new bracket. Check the insides to make sure that they're still in good condition, because you have the roll arms in there moving back and forth. And if this gets collapsed somehow during a crash or something like that, that gap will change and it will bind your roll arms, and you could have the action of where the arm needs to release and it won't, and therefore when you index, things happen. So as long as your bracket looks okay, check your compensator bushing to make sure that that's not getting worn out. Usually just check with my gears and make sure I have no up and down movement, or if you have the up and down, you probably have the left and right also. And if that's the case, get a new bushing. Check the diameter of your gear, make sure that that's not getting worn. If that's worn, get a new one of those. You got to make sure that these two gears slide freely in and out of each other and spin free of when they're together. Otherwise, that's going to interfere with your timing compensation. Check your springs. Make sure that when they go into the cup, they're good and tight. You should have some good overlap. I mean, you should have to really force those babies in there. Over time, if you have a arm or a set of thread rolls that really need some heavy compensation, one of these springs will get. It'll take so much pressure, and then over time, it may start forming in a circular motion or position. Or the spring itself will get damaged. Just get rid of those. You'll see a gap usually. If they're too badly damaged, you'll see a gap, something like that, when it's in here up against the pin. Just get new springs, because you're going to be fighting timing issues the whole time you're thread rolling. Those springs have to be tight. Now I'm going to disassemble the thread rolling arms. The way I do that is remove these gear guards. When you remove the gear guard, the idler gear will come out. inspect the gear, make sure the teeth are all there, nothing smashed up. Check the ID, make sure that's good and smooth, not galled up. Remove the locking screw. So you can get the roll pin out. Check your thrust washer, make sure that that's not worn out. Check both sides. Check your pin, make sure you don't have any galling from the thread rolls. Make sure the end's not snapped off. Sometimes people put these in the wrong position, loosen the lock screw, and then use a punch to get the pin out because they don't want to move that screw down to the taper adjust pin. Snaps that off. If that's the case, I would get a new pin. Take your roll gear guard off. Check your roll gear, check the tangs, make sure they're in good shape. Check the teeth, make sure you have all your teeth in there. And do the same thing on the other side. Now we're going to go to the wedge rollers. Push your pin out of there. Check your pin. Over time, with all the rolling pressure, the wedge roller may wear down the pin. If it's got any wear, I would get a new one. Check your spring. Over time, they overextend, and you'll see that thing in the relaxed position stuck out like this or twisted or whatever. If that's the case, get a new one. Also, these that loop might get stretched out or broken. If you find anything that's not right, just you're better off trying to replace it than fighting me trying to use it. That's it. Now, check your arms for anywhere, all the holes, for any elongation or heavy wear. Usually the fulcrum. If these screws come loose, you could get some slap in your pin, causing damage there. So just make sure your pins fit in there nice and free. Make sure the hole's still around. Same thing with your thread rolling pinhole. Sometimes these will be loose, and over thread rolling with a loose pin, it's going to knock that hole all out of shape, and you'll get all kinds of, your pin will move around in the hole, even though it's locked down with all the rolling pressure. So as long as everything is, your thread roll arms are in good shape and all your components, everything can be put back together. Okay, now we're going to reassemble the head. I usually, I'll start with the compensator. Get your internal, external gears, throw those in there. Line up the hole in your spring retainer with the external thread gear. Make sure you get the dog point. Set screw goes in first. And you're going to bring that down to make contact with the detent, making sure that the internal gear still turns free and the external still turns free. Now you're going to put your locking screw in. Tighten that up. Make sure your internal gear still spins free, and you can rotate the assembly as such without any interference or dragging. Make sure you don't have a lot of slop between the gear and spring retainer. Now you're going to lay this down and put your springs in. There's a pin in there. You just put your spring in against that pin, roll it around the retainer. Put your next one in. You're going to be careful here because these springs will pop out on you. Just force that in and hold it in there. And I always leave one spring, that last spring, don't push it all the way down. Leave that end sticking up a little bit, because when you put the adjusting collar on, it makes it easier to get that wedge between the two springs so that the compensation works properly. In order for it to work properly, this wedge has to be between the two springs. So just bring that down, hold your internal gear up, give that a little rotation, and push down. Make sure you're in between. You can rotate this and make sure you get the spring back on in both directions. Then you know you're in between the springs. While that's down, put your retaining spring back on there, retaining clip back on. Clip that in. Tighten up the lock screw. As long as everything rotates nice and free, you can put the center gear guard back in. There's a little tab and there's a slot on the bracket that's going to slide into. Put the Phillips head screw on there. Tighten that down. That's good to go. Now your compensator's done. Set that aside for a minute. Bring your arms over. You put your idler gears in. And the idler gears need to be opposite. So when you put them in, it needs to look like that. One is up against the short shoulder here, and one is on the inside. The reason for that is the idler gears make contact with your compensator gears. So if they were not opposing, you would have the idler gears on the same gear, therefore no compensation. So once you have those in there like that, you can put your idler gear guards on. Put your spring and wedge in. Wedge roller. Make sure you line the flat up so you bring your set screw down on the flat. Tighten that up. Slide your spring in the slot on the other side. Wedge roller. Okay. And set screw. Now we're going to put the roll pins in. Just start it in. Take a wedge or a thread roll gear and gear washer. Slide it on. Then a thrust washer. Slide that on. Lock down the lock screw. Put your gear guard on.
There's a hole in the thrust washer. What's that used for?
On the arm, there is a pin. This is actually counterboard for the washer. And there's a little pin in there. And that hole goes over that pin so it gets locked in position. Okay, once you got your gears and everything in there, now it's time to put it back in the bracket. Slide her down, rotate it, bring it up, take your fulcrum. I like to lay these down so it lines up your idler gear for you. Make sure your flat's lined up for the dog point. Lock that screw out. Make sure once you're done, your gear train moves freely with no snags. And then if you need to, you can reference one of our other videos for aligning your thread roll pin when you're done.
Please visit us at www.cjwinter.com for additional information.